This is my Black African Diaspora World News by Rayme Jurmain Djalis. From the Netherlands on December 6, 2025. Starting with Source, Caribbean News Global. St. Lucia IMF 2025 Article 4 Mission. Key findings and recommendations. An International Monetary Fund, IMF, staff mission, led by Swarnali Ahmed Hanan, conducted the 2025 Article 4 consultation with St. Lucia authorities in Castries from November 3 to 14, 2025. The mission concluded that St. Lucia staged a robust recovery following the COVID-19 pandemic. The economy is projected to grow by 1.7% in 2025, after expanding by 4.7% in 2024. Temporary hotel closures and reduced airlift may moderate tourism growth in 2025, but strong construction activity, domestic demand, and credit expansion are expected to offset this impact. Tourism is projected to rebound in 2026, while medium-term growth is expected to gradually stabilize at its potential rate of 1.5%. Inflation, which was negative in 2024 due to lower international food and energy prices, is projected to rise to 0.8% in 2025. The current account deficit increased in 2024 because of widening net income balances, but is expected to improve over the medium term. Public finances have improved, with primary balance surpluses recorded for 3 consecutive years. The mission highlighted long-standing challenges. Income per capita has diverged from that of the United States over past decades. Potential growth remains constrained by limited productivity, labor market distortions, high informality, and historically weak credit growth. High public debt and large rollover needs pose significant vulnerabilities. Being in the hurricane belt, St. Lucia is highly susceptible to natural disasters, emphasizing the importance of resilience investments. The government has taken steps to address these challenges, including increasing pensions and minimum pensions, implementing a minimum wage, expanding the universal healthcare program, establishing a ministry for persons with disabilities, and planning an unemployment insurance program. Policies also focus on disaster preparedness and renewable energy development. Medium-term fiscal challenges remain. Public debt is projected to stabilize at around 77% of GDP, with gross financing needs remaining elevated. The IMF mission recommended a comprehensive fiscal adjustment strategy, including tax reforms, improved expenditure targeting, and adoption of a medium-term fiscal framework with formal fiscal rules. Tax reforms could include rationalizing corporate incentives, broadening the VAT base, improving progressivity, and reforming fuel and excise taxes. Strengthening financial system resilience is crucial. Real credit rebounded by 5.6% in 2024, largely driven by commercial real estate lending, which now accounts for 7.4% of total loans. The mission emphasized careful monitoring of non-performing loans, prudent lending practices, and regional coordination for banks and credit unions. Complementary measures for the insurance sector, including improved climate risk coverage, are recommended. Structural reforms to boost long-term growth include addressing high finance costs, enhancing workforce education, streamlining customs and tax procedures, expanding trade and tourism markets, and promoting digitalization. Investment in digital infrastructure, energy transition, climate adaptation, and financial inclusion are essential to strengthen resilience. These measures aim to support inclusive growth, lower the cost of living, and enhance St. Lucia's economic stability in the face of domestic and global risks. My next news is Source, Caribbean News Global. Jamaica re-elected to IMO Council. Date: December 5, 2025. Jamaica has been successfully re-elected to the International Maritime Organization Council, securing 129 votes, the highest number ever achieved by the country in an IMO Council election. This milestone highlights Jamaica's growing prominence in international maritime affairs and demonstrates the consistent work of the Maritime Authority of Jamaica in representing national and regional interests. Bertrand Smith, Director General of the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, emphasized in an interview with JIS News that the re-election reflects the country's efforts not only on behalf of Jamaica but also in representing the wider Caribbean region and other member states within the IMO. Smith noted that the upcoming biennium presents both challenges and opportunities, particularly regarding the global maritime transition toward decarbonization. He stressed that the Maritime Authority will continue providing leadership on behalf of Caribbean and small island developing states, promoting safe, secure, and environmentally sustainable shipping practices. Jamaica's re-election enables the country to serve a 9th term in Category C of the IMO Council. Category C represents countries not elected under Categories A or B, but that have special interests in maritime transport or navigation. The IMO Council governs the organization when the Assembly, which meets biennially, is not in session. Among its responsibilities, the Council approves the work of various committees, proposes the budget, appoints the Secretary General for Assembly approval, and provides strategic policy recommendations, including the IMO's long-term strategic plan. The election took place during November 2025, at the 34th session of the IMO Assembly, hosted at the IMO headquarters in London, England. Jamaica's campaign for re-election was coordinated by a steering committee composed of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Jamaican High Commission in London, the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, and the Ministry of Energy, Transport, and Telecommunications. These concerted efforts contributed to the unprecedented number of votes in favor of Jamaica. The IMO Council consists of 10 countries with the largest interest in providing international shipping services in Category A, 10 countries representing the largest interests in international seaborne trade in Category B, and 20 countries in Category C, ensuring geographic representation and the inclusion of states with special maritime interests. Jamaica's role in Category C ensures that the perspectives of the Caribbean region and small island developing states continue to be actively represented in decision-making processes that influence global maritime policy. The newly elected council convened at its 136th session in London on December 4th, where it will elect its chair and vice chair for the next biennium. Jamaica's leadership and continued presence on the council are expected to play a significant role in shaping international maritime regulations, promoting decarbonization initiatives, and supporting sustainable growth in global shipping. Overall, Jamaica's record-breaking re-election to the IMO Council demonstrates the country's commitment to maritime governance, its ability to mobilize diplomatic and institutional support, and its determination to influence global shipping standards in alignment with Caribbean interests. The achievement underscores Jamaica's continued leadership in international maritime affairs and its proactive role in promoting sustainable, safe, and efficient shipping practices worldwide. My next news is African news. U.S. considers expanding travel ban to more than 30 countries. African news. The United States may soon widen its travel restrictions to encompass more than 30 countries, as the Trump administration intensifies its crackdown on immigration. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem indicated on Thursday that she is recommending a broader travel ban targeting any nation that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. Noem did not specify which countries would be included in the expanded restrictions. However, a State Department cable from June suggests that several African nations could be affected. These include Kenya, Angola, Egypt, Ethiopia, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria, among others. The cable cited concerns over unreliable identity documents, inadequate passport security, and the refusal or unwillingness of some countries to accept deported nationals. The potential expansion comes in the wake of heightened debate over U.S. immigration policy. On November 28, President Donald Trump threatened to permanently pause migration from what he described as third world countries. This statement followed a shooting near the White House on November 26, in which a soldier was killed. The shooter was identified as an Afghan national who had sought asylum in the United States in 2021. Currently, the U.S. maintains travel bans on several African countries. In June, restrictions were placed on Chad, the Congo Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. Additional limitations were applied to Burundi, Sierra Leone, and Togo, targeting both entry and visa processing. The proposed expansion could dramatically increase the number of African countries facing travel restrictions, raising concerns among diplomats, human rights organizations, and migration advocacy groups. Critics argue that the proposed bans risk unfairly targeting countries in Africa and other regions that are not inherently linked to security threats. Observers point out that broad restrictions could impact tourism, business, education, and international relations, while potentially fueling anti-US sentiment abroad. The African Union and individual governments have previously condemned the existing bans, highlighting the negative effects on citizens seeking legal travel opportunities and on bilateral cooperation. NOAM emphasized that evaluations are ongoing and that recommendations for additional restrictions will be assessed carefully before implementation. She stressed that the goal of the administration is to protect national security and prevent entry by individuals who might pose risks. Still, critics note that the rhetoric surrounding the proposed measures has been inflammatory, raising concerns about potential discrimination based on nationality or continent. The potential expansion of the travel ban underscores the Trump administration's focus on tightening U.S. borders and limiting migration. Policy experts predict that the final list of affected countries will likely be announced after internal reviews, legal assessments, and consultations with the State Department. Meanwhile, human rights groups are calling for careful scrutiny and the establishment of clear, transparent criteria to ensure fairness and avoid unjust targeting of entire populations. As the United States moves forward with its immigration and travel policies, the international community will be watching closely. The expansion of travel bans to additional countries, particularly in Africa, could have far-reaching diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian consequences, affecting millions of potential travelers and altering regional relationships for years to come. My next news is Africa news. Tunisian opposition leader Ahmed Najib Chebbi arrested amid political crackdown. Africa news. One of Tunisia's most prominent opposition figures, Ahmed Najib Chebbi, was arrested on Thursday following a recent sentencing by the Tunis Court of Appeal. Chebbi, a longtime political activist and former leader of the Progressive Democratic Party, was sentenced last week to 12 years in prison in a high-profile trial, accusing him of conspiracy against state security. The arrest comes amid a sweeping crackdown on dissent, as Chebbi joins 36 other opposition politicians and activists currently serving sentences ranging from 5 to 45 years. Among those targeted is Rayme Issa, leader of the National Salvation Front, who was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Issa was reportedly seized by plainclothes officers in an unmarked vehicle after participating in an opposition protest on Saturday. In response to her detention, she has begun a hunger strike to protest what she describes as politically motivated arrests. Authorities, led by President Kais Saied and his government, have consistently rejected allegations that the legal proceedings are politically driven. Officials maintain that prosecutions are necessary to protect the state from serious national security threats and purported plots aimed at destabilizing Tunisia. Critics, however, argue that these actions reflect an ongoing effort to silence dissent and consolidate power. Chebbi, originally from Tozeur, Tunisia, has a long history of political activism. He led the Progressive Democratic Party, PDP, for 23 years, a party founded in 1981. Known for his opposition to dictatorships, Chebbi actively resisted the regimes of Habib Bourguiba and Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, resulting in periods of imprisonment during the 1980s. Following the Tunisian Revolution in 2011, Chebbi was elected to the National Constituent Assembly, playing a key role in shaping the country's post-revolution political landscape. In 2022, he co-founded the National Salvation Front, a coalition of parties and movements united in opposition to President Said's government. The arrest of Chebbi and other opposition leaders marks a significant escalation in Tunisia's political tensions, raising concerns among human rights organizations and international observers. The trial and subsequent arrests have drawn widespread criticism for perceived violations of due process and political freedoms. Observers note that the heavy sentences imposed on opposition figures may further stifle political pluralism and exacerbate Tunisia's ongoing governance challenges. The crackdown occurs amid a backdrop of economic instability, rising social discontent, and ongoing debates about the limits of executive power in the country's post-revolution era. Human rights advocates have urged international attention and intervention, emphasizing the need for transparency and fair judicial procedures. The unfolding situation underscores the fragile state of democracy in Tunisia and highlights the risks faced by those challenging entrenched political authority. As Tunisia navigates these turbulent political waters, the arrests of Chebbi, Issa, and other opposition members serve as a stark reminder of the tensions between government authority and the demands for accountability, representation, and civil liberties. The international community continues to watch closely, assessing how Tunisia's leadership balances national security concerns with democratic principles and human rights commitments. My next news is Africa News. Royal Air Maroc to launch Africa's first direct flight to Los Angeles. Africa News. Royal Air Maroc, a member of the One World Alliance, is set to make history by launching Africa's first direct flight to Los Angeles. The new service, departing from Casablanca, is scheduled to begin on the 7th of June 2026, just days ahead of the FIFA World Cup, co-hosted by the United States, Mexico, and Canada, which kicks off on the 11th of June. The airline has announced that the Los Angeles route will operate 3 times a week, reflecting growing demand for transatlantic travel from Africa to the United States. Royal Air Maroc emphasized that the service is a strategic move to strengthen its long-haul network in North America and improve connectivity for passengers across Africa and Europe. This new route to Los Angeles is a milestone for African aviation and demonstrates our commitment to expanding global connectivity, the airline stated. It also provides convenient access for football fans and travelers heading to the FIFA World Cup, ensuring seamless travel from across the continent. The Casablanca departure time has been carefully scheduled in the very early morning to allow passengers from West Africa, Central Africa, and Europe to make smooth connections. This aligns with Royal Air Maroc's broader strategy of positioning Casablanca as a major transit hub, enabling efficient travel between Africa, Europe, and North America. Royal Air Maroc already operates flights to several major North American destinations, including New York, Washington, Miami, Montreal, and Toronto. The addition of Los Angeles marks a significant step in the airline's long-term plan to consolidate its role as a leading global air and tourism hub. The strategy also anticipates increased travel ahead of the 2030 FIFA World Cup, which will be co-hosted by Spain and Portugal. The airline plans to operate the Los Angeles route using modern Boeing 787 Dreamliners, offering passengers a combination of comfort, efficiency, and long-range capabilities. Tickets for the route will go on sale starting on the 4th of December 2025, allowing travelers to secure their flights well ahead of the tournament and the busy summer travel season. Industry analysts note that Royal Air Maroc's expansion reflects a broader trend of African carriers increasing their presence in long-haul markets, targeting key global cities that connect the continent to business, tourism, and sports opportunities. By directly linking Casablanca to Los Angeles, the airline is opening new opportunities for trade, tourism, and cultural exchange between Africa and the west coast of the United States. With this landmark service, Royal Air Maroc is not only enhancing its international footprint, but also positioning Morocco as a gateway for African travelers seeking convenient, high-quality connections to North America. The airline's continued investment in fleet modernization and route expansion underscores its ambition to become Africa's premier long-haul carrier, while supporting the continent's growing role in global aviation. Royal Air Maroc's historic launch to Los Angeles is expected to attract significant attention from football fans, business travelers, and tourists alike, marking a new chapter in African aviation history. My next news is Africa News. Russia and India pledge to strengthen trade amid global tensions. Africa News. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have announced plans to significantly boost bilateral trade between their countries, reinforcing long-standing economic and strategic ties amid mounting pressure from the United States and other Western allies. The announcement came during the 23rd Russia-India Summit, held in India on Friday. Both leaders signed an economic cooperation program extending until 2030, aimed at diversifying trade and increasing annual bilateral trade to $100 billion by the end of the decade. Energy partnerships were also emphasized, reflecting the historically strong collaboration between the two nations in oil, gas, and nuclear sectors. Humanity has had to endure countless challenges and crises, and even in the midst of all of these, India-Russia friendship has stood firm like a pole star, Modi said, praising the durability of the bilateral relationship. Putin highlighted the importance of strengthening economic links as global markets face turbulence and geopolitical tensions persist. India and Russia share a decades-long partnership dating back to the Cold War, covering defense, energy, and technology sectors. However, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has placed New Delhi in a delicate position. The United States and European Union have urged India to reconsider its relationship with Russia, especially in the context of sanctions imposed on Moscow following its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The timing of the summit is significant, occurring as the US seeks to rally global support for a Ukraine peace deal and push for closer cooperation with key allies. Observers note that India's efforts to maintain balance between Moscow and Washington will be tested, as both sides monitor the implications of deepening economic ties with Russia. The economic cooperation program signed at the summit aims to expand trade across multiple sectors, including energy, pharmaceuticals, defense equipment, and technology. The initiative is expected to strengthen India's energy security, while providing Russia with critical export markets amid sanctions and declining Western trade. Officials indicated that both nations will explore joint investments, enhance financial linkages, and promote trade in local currencies to facilitate smoother transactions. While the agreement strengthens Moscow-New Delhi ties, critics warn that closer economic integration with Russia may complicate India's trade negotiations with the European Union and the United States. India has been actively pursuing agreements to expand its export markets, and any perception of favoring Russia could be a point of contention with key trading partners. Analysts emphasize that India's balancing act is part of a broader strategy to assert its strategic autonomy while preserving relations with major global powers. Despite international scrutiny, the India-Russia relationship remains robust, anchored by historical trust and complementary economic interests. The 23rd Russia-India Summit underscores the continuing relevance of bilateral partnerships in a multipolar world. As India and Russia work to implement the newly signed economic program, their commitment to expanding trade, energy cooperation, and strategic ties signals a sustained partnership likely to shape regional and global economic dynamics in the coming decade. My next news is Africa news. Somali migrant survives torture in Libya, clings to dream of a better life. Africa news. Somali migrant Mohammed Abdi Awale has endured a journey marked by extreme hardship, torture, and detention in Libya. Yet his lifelong dream of reaching the United States remains undiminished. Awale is among 165 Somalis recently repatriated after surviving harrowing conditions while attempting to reach Europe. Awale's aspiration to live in the US began in childhood, but restrictive policies under former President Donald Trump forced him to take a perilous overland route through Africa. My long-term dream since childhood has been to live in the US. But when Trump came to power, my hope of going there was dashed because he hates foreigners, he said. I still hold on to the hope of going to the US, and I believe that will happen after Trump's term expires. His journey took him through Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Sudan before he was captured near the Libya border by human traffickers. Awale was taken to Kufa, a notorious hub for trafficking networks, where torture was reportedly routine. Captors filmed him being beaten to coerce his family into paying ransom. Awale's mother, How Elmo Rage, recounts the terrifying ordeal of receiving a video showing her son screaming in pain. They threatened me and instructed me to send the money, she said. As a poor woman, I couldn't afford the ransom, so I reached out to all Somalis, begging for help. Thankfully, they responded, and my son was released after we paid $17,000. After being freed, Awale attempted to continue toward the Mediterranean coast, but conditions worsened. The group walked more than 2 weeks through the desert, facing starvation and exhaustion, before being detained near Tripoli. Awale spent 3 months in various detention centers under harsh conditions before being flown back to Somalia in November. Awale's experience highlights the perils faced by thousands of Somali migrants fleeing decades of conflict, poverty, and instability. Many seek refuge in neighboring countries, while others, driven by dreams of opportunity in Europe or the United States, risk dangerous routes controlled by smugglers and traffickers. Humanitarian organizations warn that migrants like Awale face extreme physical and psychological risks, including abuse, extortion, and exposure to inhumane detention conditions. International efforts to address trafficking networks and improve protection for vulnerable migrants remain limited, leaving individuals at the mercy of criminal operations. Despite the trauma, Olwale remains hopeful. His mother, while concerned for his safety, recognizes his determination. "I know he wishes for a better life," she said. "I pray God gives him a safe future, not the dangerous one he found." Olwale's story is a stark reminder of the human cost of migration amid political restrictions and conflict in Africa. It underscores the need for strengthened protections, international cooperation, and viable pathways for those seeking safety and opportunity abroad. For migrants like him, hope remains a driving force, even in the face of immense adversity. My next news is Africa news. Chinese exports to Africa soar amid global trade tensions. Africa news. Chinese exports to African nations are projected to surpass $200 billion in 2025, even as Beijing remains embroiled in a protracted trade war with the United States. This trend underscores China's growing economic influence on the continent despite global trade uncertainties. According to Chinese customs data, exports to Africa totaled $122 billion in the first 8 months of 2025. With projections suggesting the figure could reach $200 billion by year-end. Meanwhile, African exports to China grew modestly, by 2.3%, to $87 billion during the same period. The imbalance pushed Africa's trade deficit with China to nearly $60 billion, highlighting the continent's continued reliance on Chinese manufactured goods. The bulk of Africa's imports from China comprises machinery, heavy equipment, automobiles, and metal products. These goods play a pivotal role in supporting infrastructure projects, manufacturing, and urban development across the continent. In 2024, bilateral trade between China and Africa reached a record $295.6 billion, marking a fourth consecutive year of growth. China has taken steps to bolster African exports in response to trade imbalances. This year, Beijing waived tariffs for 53 African countries, with which it maintains diplomatic relations. The move aims to enhance Africa's competitiveness in global markets and strengthen the economic ties underpinning China-Africa cooperation. Analysts suggest that tariff waivers could stimulate the growth of African industries, particularly in sectors like agriculture, textiles, and light manufacturing, which have previously struggled to penetrate Chinese markets. Economic observers note that China's expanding trade footprint in Africa is part of a broader strategy to diversify its markets amid tensions with the United States. By deepening economic engagement with Africa, China not only secures access to raw materials and strategic resources, but also strengthens political and diplomatic influence across the continent. Critics warn, however, that the growing trade imbalance raises concerns about African countries' long-term industrialization and economic sovereignty. While imports of Chinese machinery and infrastructure equipment facilitate development projects, the reliance on Chinese goods may stifle local manufacturing capacity and increase debt dependency through financing linked to Chinese companies. Despite these challenges, African governments and regional bodies continue to pursue initiatives aimed at increasing exports and reducing trade deficits. Partnerships with China, coupled with domestic industrialization strategies, are seen as crucial to sustaining economic growth while minimizing vulnerabilities from over-reliance on imports. With 2025 poised to set another record in China-Africa trade, the dynamics between these two regions will remain a key focus for economists, policymakers, and international investors. The combination of tariff waivers, robust infrastructure demand, and ongoing global trade tensions suggests that China's role in Africa's economic landscape will continue to expand in the near term, shaping both development trajectories and geopolitical alignments. My next news is Africa news. Tanzania blocks activists online ahead of Independence Day protests. Africa news. Meta has restricted prominent Tanzanian activist Maria Siranjit Sihai's Instagram account within the country, following a government directive. The move escalates concerns over digital censorship as Tanzania prepares for planned Independence Day protests on December 9th. Separately, US-based activist Mange Kimambi, whose accounts collectively reached 2,700,000 followers, reported that her accounts were deleted for alleged recidivism policy violations. Kamambi contends the deletions were politically motivated, aimed at stifling post-election mobilization after October's disputed vote. Meta publicly confirmed that it limited Saranjit Sihai's reach domestically to comply with Tanzanian authorities' legal requests, while denying direct involvement in Kamambi's account deletions. The tech company's admission is a rare acknowledgement of enforcing a government-mandated restriction on activist content. Saranjit Sihai, a vocal critic of President Samia Suluhu Hassan, has called for a congressional hearing in the United States, accusing Meta of enabling crimes against humanity by silencing dissent following the October election violence, which left hundreds dead. A U.S. senator condemned the platform's actions, highlighting big tech's role in repression across Africa as Washington reviews aid relationships with the country. Post-election crackdown goes digital. Tanzania banned nationwide protests on December 3rd and cancelled official Independence Day events on December 9th, redirecting funds to repair damage from earlier unrest. These actions follow internet shutdowns in October, blocks on approximately 80,000 websites, and lethal force used against demonstrators, which drew condemnation from the United Nations for targeting civilians and media outlets. Activists, including Kamambi, argue that account removals are part of a broader strategy to prevent future protests, reflecting similar patterns observed in Ethiopia and Uganda. With around 6,750,000 social media users, roughly 9.7% of the population, Tanzania's measures demonstrate a chilling effect on youth organizing through platforms central to public expression. Rights groups warn that a censorship kill switch is emerging, with digital repression increasingly used to silence political opposition. Despite growing international attention, Meta's oversight board has remained silent on the matter, raising questions about accountability and the ethical responsibilities of tech companies operating under authoritarian mandates. Observers note that restricting activist voices online may hinder transparency, limit political debate, and escalate tensions rather than mitigate them. Digital platforms, widely used for information sharing and mobilization, remain a critical arena in which Tanzanian authorities seek to control the narrative ahead of the Independence Day commemorations. As the country approaches December 9th, the world is watching how the Tanzanian government's digital and physical security measures will intersect, and whether international pressure or public advocacy can influence the rights of citizens to organize, protest, and access information freely. My next news is Burkina Faso moves to reinstate death penalty amid military-led reforms. Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers has approved a bill to reintroduce the death penalty, targeting crimes including treason, terrorism, and espionage, according to authorities. The move marks a significant reversal from the country's 2018 abolition of capital punishment. Justice Minister Adasso Rodrigue Bayala explained on Facebook that the adoption of the bill is part of broader reforms aimed at having a justice system that responds to the deep aspirations of our people. The bill must still pass through Parliament and undergo judicial review before it can become law. Since seizing power in a coup in 2022, Burkina Faso's military leaders have implemented sweeping changes to the country's political and judicial structures. These reforms have included postponing elections that were intended to restore civilian rule and dissolving the previously independent Electoral Commission. The proposed return of the death penalty forms part of a wider effort by the junta to consolidate authority and reshape governance according to its priorities. Critics warn that these developments come amid a broader pattern of repression. In recent years, the government has increasingly curtailed press freedom, suspending international broadcasters such as the BBC and Voice of America after their reporting on mass killings of civilians by national armed forces. Earlier this year, 3 prominent journalists were detained, highlighting ongoing concerns about freedom of expression under military rule. Burkina Faso is one of several West African nations where military forces have taken control in recent years, often capitalizing on public dissatisfaction with prior democratically elected governments over issues such as national security. The junta's measures, including this latest push to restore the death penalty, have sparked criticism from human rights organizations, which point to a record of arbitrary detentions and other abuses. The country faces persistent security challenges, particularly in the arid Sahel region south of the Sahara, Burkina Faso has been increasingly affected by violent attacks from extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. In the context of ongoing insecurity, some government officials have argued that harsher penalties, including capital punishment, could serve as a deterrent against severe crimes such as terrorism. With a population of approximately 23 million, Burkina Faso continues to navigate a precarious political and humanitarian landscape. International observers have repeatedly urged the military government to uphold human rights and restore civilian governance, emphasizing that legal reforms, including the potential return of the death penalty, should comply with international standards. While supporters of the bill argue that it strengthens national security and enforces accountability for the most serious crimes, opponents warn that reinstating capital punishment could exacerbate human rights concerns and undermine Burkina Faso's progress toward legal and judicial modernization. The parliamentary debate and subsequent judicial review are expected to draw both domestic and international attention, as the country confronts questions of justice, security, and governance under continued military oversight. My next news is: Kenyan Parliament condemns British Army unit BATAC over decades of abuses. Kenyan authorities have released a damning report from a parliamentary inquiry accusing the British Army Training Unit Kenya, BATAC, of decades of human rights violations, environmental damage, and misconduct. The investigation, conducted by the Defense, Intelligence, and Foreign Relations Committee, documented repeated incidents of sexual abuse, including rape and assault, often followed by abandonment of children fathered by soldiers. One of the most notorious cases cited is the death in 2012 of a young Kenyan woman, whose body was found in a hotel septic tank, a case long associated with BATAC personnel. Beyond sexual violence, the report holds the unit responsible for environmental destruction, mishandling unexploded ordnance, and improper disposal of military waste, resulting in injuries, deaths, and long-term degradation of local land. Kenyan lawmakers described BATAC's presence as more akin to an occupying force than a partner. They called into question the long-standing defense cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom and demanded stronger oversight, accountability, and mechanisms for victims to obtain justice and compensation. The United Kingdom government expressed regret over the findings and stated it is ready to investigate new allegations once evidence is provided. The report has heightened tensions around foreign military presence in Kenya, with affected communities seeking justice, structural reforms, and more stringent safeguards to prevent further abuses. My next news is: Source: Caribbean News Global. Dominican Republic breaks ground with largest mixed-use development. Date: December 5, 2025. RSP Architects, a leading national retail master planning and design firm, has announced the groundbreaking of City Center by Lady Lee, the largest mixed-use development in the Dominican Republic, led by developer and operator Corporación Lady Lee. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on November 27 in Santo Domingo East, where Dominican Republic President Luis Abinader emphasized that the project reflects the nation's continued economic strength and stability. City Center by Lady Lee is strategically located at the intersection of Autopista Las Americas and Avenida Charles de Gaulle, two major urban arteries near the ocean and just 13 miles from the international airport. The master plan includes a combination of retail, office, residential, and hospitality components designed to create a world-class, integrated urban destination. The development will feature two 27-story office towers, 6 30-story residential high-rises with nearly 1,800 total units, and a 17-story AC Marriott-branded hotel and convention center. Retail spaces are arranged across 3 levels, conceived as 5 interconnecting themed neighborhoods that align with a merchandising strategy while providing a modern, engaging shopping environment. The mall will host a diverse mix of national and international retail brands, restaurants, cinemas, a gym, medical facilities, and entertainment zones. It will also dedicate spaces to support small and medium-sized enterprises and promote female entrepreneurship. The main entrance, featuring a double-height canopy and water feature, creates a distinct and recognizable identity for the district. The interconnected hubs of the project are designed to bring large-scale spaces to a human, understandable level. The western hub near the office towers serves as a platform for corporate events, product launches, and branded initiatives. While the eastern hub adjacent to the hotel and residential areas creates park-like spaces intended as an urban oasis. According to Christina Villa, AIA, RSP project manager. City Center by Lady Lee reflects the growing sophistication of the Caribbean consumer while creating an authentic sense of community. It will attract regional and international tourists and support the daily shopping needs of local residents, she said. David Herbert, AIA, RSP project designer, added that interconnected spaces help orient shoppers and create a cohesive district. RSP Architects has an extensive portfolio throughout Central and South America, the Caribbean, and South Florida. Since joining forces with Larry Beam and the Beam Partnership in 2019, RSP Miami has led high-profile projects including the award-winning renovation of Walk in Coconut Grove, the transit-oriented development Grove Central, and the global headquarters for the Miami Association of Realtors. Current projects include the Boca Raton Innovation Campus Transformation, the 14 Rock Luxury Residential Tower in Miami, South Place City Center in Cutler Bay, and Ovation in Orlando. City Center by Lady Lee represents a landmark moment in the Dominican Republic's urban development. By blending residential, commercial, and leisure components into a unified district, the project aims to strengthen Santo Domingo's position as a hub for tourism, commerce, and investment while providing innovative spaces for community engagement and international business. My next news is Source, Caribbean News Global. Between 121 and 142 million people are employed in the circular economy globally. Date: December 5, 2025. A new report by the International Labour Organization, ILO, Circular Economy, the World Bank Group, and the UN Partnership for Action on Green Economy, UN PAGE, highlights the growing importance of the circular economy in creating jobs and promoting sustainable development. The study, titled Employment in the Circular Economy, Leveraging Circularity to Create Decent Work, provides the first global analysis of employment in sectors that contribute to the circular economy, including repair, recycling, second-hand trade, and waste management. According to the report, between 121 and 142 million people worldwide are employed in circular economy activities. This represents approximately between 5 and 5.8% of total global employment, excluding agriculture. Most circular economy employment is concentrated in the Global South, with the Americas and Asia and the Pacific regions reporting the highest shares, at 6.4% and 5.8% respectively. More than half of all circular economy workers, over 74 million people, are employed in the informal economy, where jobs are largely unregulated and lack state protection. This is particularly prevalent in developing countries, leaving workers driving sustainable development and caring for the planet among the most disadvantaged. Many face precarious working conditions, unstable incomes, and low wages. The study emphasizes the need for policies that integrate decent work, sustainable enterprises, and social protections into the circular economy. Casper Edmonds, head of the Extractives, Energy and Manufacturing Unit at the ILO, noted that while some workers are at the forefront of innovation, for many circularity is not a choice but a way of surviving. By combining investments in circularity with measures to advance decent work, governments and businesses can accelerate a just and job-rich transition to sustainable economic practices. The report identifies that a small number of sectors dominate employment in the circular economy. Repair and maintenance account for nearly half of all circular economy jobs, approximately 46%, followed by manufacturing at 24.5%, and waste management at 8%. In contrast, industries crucial to advancing the circular transition, such as construction and mining, currently have a very low share of circular employment. Targeted policies are recommended to green jobs in these sectors and speed their transition towards circular practices. Women make up 26% of circular economy workers, highlighting the need for gender-inclusive policies and intentional investments to ensure equitable access to opportunities. Namita Dutta, head of Gender and Economic Inclusion Thought Leadership at the International Finance Corporation, emphasized that intentional policies can create not only green jobs but better quality green jobs linked to productive value chains for women and informal workers. The report further calls for strengthening public procurement and investment in high-potential sectors, supporting sustainable enterprises with finance and capacity building, developing inclusive education programs, enforcing occupational safety and health standards, extending social protections to informal workers, and improving data ecosystems at local, national, and international levels. Esther Goodwin Brown, Circular Jobs Initiative lead at Circle Economy, noted that while this study provides a critical first step, significant data gaps remain, particularly regarding informal economy and agricultural workers. Bridging these gaps will help design circular economy policies that maximize employment benefits while promoting social equity and environmental sustainability. My next news is Source, Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, Uruguay to boost investments and exports with IDB support. Date: December 5, 2025. The Board of Executive Directors of the Inter-American Development Bank has approved a loan of $20 million to support Uruguay in increasing exports, promoting investments, and enhancing business productivity through greater integration into global markets. This operation represents the second project under the Conditional Credit Line for Investment Projects, known as the CCLIP, specifically the Program for Productive Development of Uruguay through Internationalization, Innovation, and Talent. The primary aim of the credit line is to simplify and streamline procedures for exporting and investing, while strengthening the effectiveness of promotion instruments and ensuring they complement other business support services. By reducing administrative hurdles, the program seeks to increase competitiveness and facilitate access to international markets for Uruguayan businesses. Implementation of the program will be carried out by Uruguay XXI, the national agency responsible for trade and investment promotion. The project focuses on modernizing and simplifying processes within the Foreign Trade Single Window of Use and the Investment Single Window VUI, thereby reducing time and costs for companies seeking to export goods or invest domestically. By creating a more efficient administrative framework, Uruguay expects to boost both investor confidence and business participation in global markets. The program targets priority sectors including life sciences, global services, audiovisual industries, and renewable energy. It will strengthen export and investment promotion tools, offering integrated support for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, investors, and public agencies. Additionally, it will establish a monitoring and evaluation unit, develop digital platforms for institutional interoperability, and incorporate predictive technologies and artificial intelligence to facilitate more informed decision-making. An important aspect of the program is the promotion of green standards through the adoption of a green taxonomy. This framework will help companies comply with sustainability requirements in international markets, enabling them to access new opportunities while meeting environmental standards. By linking productive development to sustainable practices, the initiative aligns with global trends and encourages long-term competitiveness. The plan also aligns with the broader South Connection program by addressing bottlenecks that limit global integration and the competitiveness of Uruguay's productive sector. Through these reforms, the country aims to strengthen its integration into regional value chains and expand its participation in international markets. The loan agreement specifies a repayment term of 22.5 years, with an 8-year grace period. The interest rate is based on the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, SOFR. In addition to the IDB financing, a local counterpart contribution of $2,600,000 will complement the program, bringing the total funding for the project to $22,600,000. Overall, this initiative represents a significant step toward improving Uruguay's export capacity, investment climate, and global market competitiveness. By combining administrative reform, technological modernization, and sustainability promotion, the program aims to create a more efficient, productive, and internationally integrated economic environment for Uruguayan businesses. My next news is Source, thedailydigest.com. NATO warns Russia. Preventive strikes are an option. Article by thedailydigest.com. Tensions between NATO and Russia have steadily increased since February of 2022, when Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. A series of provocations from Moscow, however, could stretch the limits of what NATO is willing to tolerate. The alliance appears to be considering a more proactive approach to counter Russia's asymmetrical warfare tactics, including cyber attacks, sabotage, and airspace violations. Recent statements by Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, the current chairman of NATO's military committee, indicate that the alliance may shift toward a more aggressive posture to address these threats. During an interview with the Financial Times, Dragone stated, "We are studying everything," signaling that NATO is evaluating options that go beyond traditional reactive measures. Admiral Dragone elaborated that, historically, NATO has been largely reactive in the cyber domain. He noted that the alliance is now considering moving toward more proactive or even preventive measures. In some circumstances, he suggested a preventive strike could be employed as a form of defensive action. However, he emphasized that such an approach would represent a significant departure from NATO's conventional strategic thinking and operational behavior, according to an analysis of his comments by the Kiev Independent. The prospect of preventive action highlights the gravity of the current security environment in Europe. Cyber attacks originating from Russia have increased in frequency and sophistication, targeting critical infrastructure, communication networks, and government systems across multiple member states. Meanwhile, acts of sabotage and repeated incursions into NATO airspace have further raised concerns regarding Russia's willingness to test the alliance's collective defense commitments. NATO's consideration of preemptive measures is consistent with a broader reassessment of military strategy in response to asymmetric threats. Traditionally, the alliance has relied on deterrence and collective defense principles outlined in Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which stipulates that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all members. The introduction of proactive or preventive responses, particularly in cyberspace, signals an adaptation to modern warfare, where threats may not manifest as conventional troop movements but can still destabilize national security. While preventive strikes remain a theoretical option, NATO officials emphasize that careful assessment and strategic planning are essential to avoid escalation. Any such action would likely be limited, targeted, and justified as a defensive measure, rather than an offensive campaign. Analysts note that miscalculations in implementing preventive measures could provoke unintended escalation with Russia, potentially impacting the broader security environment in Europe and beyond. In conclusion, Admiral Dragone's comments underscore NATO's increasing concern over Russia's asymmetric tactics and its willingness to explore new strategies to safeguard member states. The alliance continues to weigh the delicate balance between deterrence, defense, and proactive measures, highlighting the evolving nature of modern military threats and the complexity of maintaining security in the current geopolitical landscape. My next news is Source, TCE. Chinese economist issues stark warning on severe debt crisis. Article by Micah McCartney. A prominent Chinese economist has issued a strong warning regarding the risks of over-reliance on short-term stimulus measures, particularly those that drive debt levels to unsustainable heights. The concern arises amid ongoing challenges in China's post-pandemic economic recovery, where growth has slowed and consumer demand has weakened. After the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese government was initially slow to implement a comprehensive stimulus package. This delay coincided with a real estate sector crisis and high debt levels among local governments. President Xi Jinping emphasized high-quality development and targeted investments over broad fiscal stimulus, reflecting a cautious approach aimed at structural stability rather than immediate expansion. Some analysts, however, argue that the measures eventually implemented were too modest to secure a firm foundation for the world's second-largest economy. Lu Xiaoshu, chief economist at the Bank of Qingdao and director of the China Chief Economist Forum, highlighted in a recent opinion piece that reliance on fiscal and monetary stimulus is not a path to sustainable growth. According to Lu, short-term stimulus often depends on additional government borrowing, which leads to an accumulation of debt over time. This accumulation increases fiscal risks and diverts resources toward interest payments, reducing funds available for social programs and other public services. Lu warned of a potential vicious cycle, in which rising debt undermines investor confidence, raises borrowing costs, and could ultimately trigger a financial crisis. He referenced the Japanese lost decades and European countries, such as Greece, as cautionary examples, where stimulus measures and budget deficits failed to address underlying structural weaknesses, leaving behind heavy debt burdens that constrained economic growth for years. In contrast, Other economists advocate for more aggressive deficit spending to boost domestic consumption. Lian Ping, an economist at East China Normal University, supports higher government expenditures, asserting that the approach can stimulate economic activity without endangering fiscal stability. China's official deficit target for the year 2025 has been set at 4% of gross domestic product, a record high. Lian explained in published remarks that although this figure is significantly higher than previous years, the overall budgetary situation and government debt position remain stable and healthy. He highlighted the relatively low ratio of central government debt to GDP as a mitigating factor. During the Central Economic Work Conference in December of last year, which sets China's national economic agenda, Lian reiterated that the increased deficit would not create excessive risk if managed prudently. The debate underscores the tension in China's economic policymaking between short-term growth imperatives and long-term fiscal sustainability. While some advocate stimulus to counter weak consumption and economic slowdown, others caution that unchecked borrowing may generate systemic risks and compromise future government spending capacity. Overall, Liu's warnings serve as a reminder that while stimulus can support temporary growth, policymakers must carefully balance economic expansion with debt management. Failure to do so, he argues, could lead to a severe debt crisis, threatening financial stability and long-term development prospects for China. My next news is Source, ANP, Sources. Europe must take over U.S. defense role by 2027. Article by ANP. According to sources speaking to Reuters, the United States expects Europe to be largely capable of defending itself by the year 2027, significantly earlier than the timeline European NATO countries had been planning. This accelerated deadline was reportedly communicated by the U.S. Department of Defense to European diplomats earlier this week, reflecting American impatience over Europe's pace of rearmament. It remains unclear whether the deadline is intended as a soft form of pressure or a firm requirement, and it is uncertain whether it reflects the personal policy of President Donald Trump. A NATO source declined to confirm the deadline, emphasizing only that Europe is working at full speed to strengthen its defense capabilities. Currently, the United States maintains approximately 85,000 military personnel stationed in Europe. These forces are still considered indispensable for logistics, intelligence operations, and command functions. The role of nuclear deterrence, provided by the US, is not currently under discussion and remains a core aspect of European security planning. The European Union has expressed the goal of achieving self-defense capability by the year 2030. However, experts caution that even this later timeline will be difficult to meet, given the challenges of procurement, modernization, and integration across multiple member states. Achieving operational autonomy will require substantial increases in defense spending, coordination of military planning, and the rapid development of new technologies to replace capabilities currently provided by U.S. forces. The push for earlier European self-reliance highlights broader debates within NATO regarding burden sharing and transatlantic security responsibilities. The United States has long called for European nations to invest more in their militaries, arguing that reliance on American forces for extended periods is unsustainable. While Europe has made incremental progress, the U.S. concern is that current efforts are not rapid enough to meet the perceived strategic challenges of the coming decade. From the European perspective, transitioning from dependency to autonomous defense involves not only financial and logistical challenges but also political considerations. Coordinating defense policy across a diverse set of NATO members and EU states is complex, and national priorities often differ. Even with strong political will, experts warn that a full handover of defense responsibilities from the United States by 2027 would be extremely ambitious. Nevertheless, European leaders continue to emphasize their commitment to strengthening collective defense, citing ongoing modernization programs and plans for greater interoperability among member state forces. U.S. expectations may serve as a catalyst for accelerating these efforts, though the practical feasibility remains subject to debate. In conclusion, while the United States is pressing Europe to assume a larger share of defense responsibilities by 2027, analysts suggest that reaching full autonomy within this timeframe will require unprecedented coordination, investment, and political determination. For now, the U.S. military presence, including 85,000 personnel and nuclear deterrence capabilities, remains essential to European security. My next news is source ANP Minister Van Weel. Not every woman faces danger in Afghanistan. Article by ANP Producties. In The Hague, outgoing Dutch Asylum Minister David Van Weel stated that the systematic oppression and persecution of women by the ruling authorities in Afghanistan does not automatically entitle every Afghan woman to asylum in the Netherlands. Van Weel, a member of the VVD party, expressed support for the approach taken by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, IND, which evaluates each asylum request on a case-by-case basis. He conveyed this position in response to questions submitted by the D66, SP, and Volt parties. The statements follow the IND's recent rejection of 2 Afghan women's asylum applications. In response to criticism, the IND provided clarifications approximately 2 weeks ago, acknowledging that while the Taliban does oppress women, most Afghan women's asylum requests are approved. The agency emphasized that the individual circumstances of each applicant must be considered before making a decision. According to Van Weel, the IND assesses whether women can plausibly demonstrate that they cannot conform to Taliban rules and would therefore face danger if returned to Afghanistan. He currently sees no reason to alter this individualized assessment method. When asked specifically about the 2 women whose applications were denied, Van Weel declined to provide further commentary, maintaining that the IND's process remains appropriate. The issue also touches upon international legal considerations. The European Court of Justice has ruled that the accumulation of discriminatory measures against women in Afghanistan constitutes persecution. Van Weel acknowledged awareness of this ruling, but stated that it does not obligate the Netherlands to grant residence permits to every Afghan woman. Members of Parliament who posed the questions further sought to understand how the decision to return women aligns with legal actions previously taken by the Dutch government against Afghanistan. In September of last year, the Netherlands, together with several other countries, held Afghanistan accountable for systematic violations of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Despite these legal proceedings, Van Weel did not provide an explanation for how the government reconciles individual deportations with broader diplomatic accountability. The minister's statements highlight the Dutch government's position that asylum eligibility must be determined on an individual basis, even in countries where systemic gender-based oppression is evident. The approach prioritizes careful evaluation of personal risk over blanket assumptions based on nationality or gender alone. This policy reflects the tension between humanitarian principles, international legal obligations, and national discretion in immigration matters. While critics argue that every Afghan woman faces potential danger under Taliban rule, Van Weel and the IND maintain that asylum decisions must consider the specific circumstances of each applicant. Overall, the minister's comments underscore the challenges facing governments when balancing compliance with international human rights standards against practical immigration policies. By reaffirming the case-by-case assessment, Van Weel signals that the Dutch asylum system will continue to evaluate Afghan women's claims individually, rather than granting universal protection based solely on general risks in Afghanistan. My next news is source TCE. China unveils a ship that should alarm the U.S. Navy. Article by Tom O'Connor. Military analysts received another revealing glimpse this week of a new Chinese warship off the coast of Shanghai, an advanced vessel that some observers believe could permanently alter the future of maritime warfare. The People's Liberation Army Navy's Type 076, described as both an amphibious assault ship and a helicopter deck landing ship, is far more than another product of China's already unprecedented shipbuilding boom, a program that has long surpassed the United States Navy in scale. Larger than its predecessor, the Type 075, the new ship integrates cutting-edge launch capabilities with an expansive capacity to deploy a fleet of drones. Many analysts believe this combination has the potential to redefine how naval forces operate, fight, and project power at sea. James Patton Rogers, Executive Director of the Brooks Tech Policy Institute at Cornell University and NATO Country Director for the Full Spectrum Drone Warfare Project, told Newsweek that the Type 076 is especially significant because it merges a large amphibious assault ship, an electromagnetic catapult, and a deck optimized for various unmanned aerial vehicles. He explains that once the ship becomes fully operational, China will be able to launch reconnaissance and attack drones on a mass scale from deep within the first island chain. This capability would allow the Chinese military to locate, track, and target adversaries across much of the western Pacific Ocean. Reuters adds that the ship will not only provide overwatch for ground forces, but will also support Chinese offensive operations. Newly released imagery indicates that the first Type 076 vessel has already embarked on its second round of sea trials in less than 1 month. According to Reuters, who also advises the United Nations Security Council on the proliferation of advanced weapon systems, a successful deployment of the ship would signal a major shift in naval warfare. In his view, drones would no longer be supplementary but instead become central to both carrier operations and amphibious missions. He describes this development as the beginning of a maritime drone revolution equal to what we have witnessed on the battlefields of Europe. The origins of the Type 076 trace back to online reports in the summer of the year 2020, when military enthusiasts began circulating details about a China State Shipbuilding Corporation proposal for a more advanced successor to the Type 075. That earlier class now consists of 4 vessels named after the Chinese provinces of Hainan, Guangxi, Anhui, and Hubei. These rumors emerged around the same time Chinese President Xi Jinping declared in July of the year 2020 that drones were profoundly changing the face of warfare. He urged his armed forces to accelerate research, training, and education relating to drone-based conflict, and to expand the development of drone pilots and commanders. The Type 076 was officially revealed last December, when it was launched at the Hudong Zonghua shipyard in Shanghai. The ship was named Sichuan and assigned hull number 51. Described by the Chinese military as a key capability for projecting force into distant seas, the vessel features a full load displacement exceeding 40,000 tons, a dual-island superstructure, a full-length flight deck, and an electromagnetic catapult system. At present, only 2 active-duty warships in the world use this groundbreaking catapult technology: the United States Navy's USS Gerald R. Ford and China's Type 003 Fujian. My next news is Source, TC, Trump Administration. We are at odds with our NATO allies. Article by Shane Croucher and John Fohm. The White House states in its newly released national security strategy that the United States is at odds with its European NATO allies because of what it calls their unrealistic expectations regarding the war in Ukraine. The document also sharply criticizes European governments for undermining democratic processes in an effort to suppress opposition movements that advocate for a quicker peace settlement with Russia. This development comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin visits India in an effort to strengthen the long-standing partnership between Moscow and New Delhi. Putin's goal is to secure the support of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at a time when Washington is pressuring India to loosen its ties with Russia, especially its large-scale purchases of Russian oil, which have helped finance the Kremlin's war effort in Ukraine. The Trump administration's national security strategy, published late on Thursday, states that Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the United States. However, it launches fierce criticism at America's allies over their approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. According to the document, several European minority governments are attempting to trample on basic principles of democracy to silence opposition. The strategy asserts that it is a core interest of the United States to negotiate a rapid end to hostilities in Ukraine, and it adds that one of the administration's central policy goals is restoring conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia. Many European allies fear that Washington will pressure Kiev into accepting terms that amount to capitulation, arguing instead for a tougher and more sustained stance against Moscow. High-ranking Ukrainian officials met on Thursday in Miami with Trump advisor Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to receive a debriefing on their 5-hour meeting with Putin in Moscow. According to reports, the discussions produced no direct concessions from the Kremlin. The Ukrainian delegation will now return to Kiev for further consultations with President Volodymyr Zelensky regarding the next steps. Meanwhile, Putin is in India to deepen both military and economic cooperation with New Delhi, even as President Donald Trump seeks to drive a wedge between the two nations. Throughout the war in Ukraine, India has continued to purchase Russian oil despite U.S. pressure to halt such imports. Trump imposed tariffs on India in response to these purchases. Modi told Putin that he is not neutral in the conflict, stating instead that he supports peace, although he did not specify what kind of settlement he envisions. Yuri Ushakov, a senior Kremlin advisor and member of Russia's negotiating delegation with the United States on Ukraine, said on Russian television that another meeting between Trump and Putin is possible. The two leaders previously met in Anchorage, Alaska, where, according to the Kremlin, they reached preliminary understandings that now form the basis of the current peace proposals being discussed for Ukraine. The unfolding diplomatic landscape underscores the widening divide between Washington and its European allies, even as both Kiev and Moscow seek advantage in shifting geopolitical alignments. My next news is, source, ANP. Minister jokes about death threats against Hoofdpayet. Article by ANP Producties. In The Hague, the outgoing Minister of Education, Kuk Moos, initially responded with humor when asked about the death threats directed at Niels van der Laan, the actor who portrays the Hoofdpayet in the Sinterklaas journal. According to the minister, individuals who make such threats will receive just a small bag of salt on Sinterklaas Eve. Moos, a member of the BBB party and the minister responsible for the public broadcasting system, made the remark following the weekly meeting of the Council of Ministers. Moos began by stating, "I have understood that a few grown-ups thought it necessary to threaten our Hoofdpayet with death." He emphasized that such behavior is unacceptable. In a light-hearted tone, he continued that he had called Saint Nicholas this morning to ask how Sinterklaas feels about it, adding that the fictional figure was quite angry, of course. According to Moos, people who become upset should express their frustrations through conversation, rather than resorting to strange or harmful actions. Although his opening comments were playful, the minister quickly shifted to a more serious tone. He stressed that the death threats are a very serious matter, and described the situation as actually too ridiculous for words. Moos said he expects that a formal police report will be filed regarding the threats. He also expressed the hope that he would be able to speak to Niels van der Laan personally to offer support. The recent wave of controversy surrounding the Sinterklaas journal has dominated headlines in the Netherlands during the past week. The uproar began when the Hoofdpayet character suggested that not Sinterklaas, but rather parents, grandparents and other family members are responsible for purchasing the presents traditionally given to children. He even mentioned potential hiding places inside the home where these gifts could be stored until the celebration. For many parents, these remarks were seen as revealing too much of the secret behind the beloved tradition. Critics argued that the program risked undermining the magic of the Sinterklaas experience for young viewers. This interpretation led to intense discussion on social media platforms, where some adults accused the show's creators of spoiling the festive mystery. The tone of some of these reactions escalated dramatically, culminating in death threats directed at the actor behind Hoofdpayet. The situation has sparked a broader national debate about the pressures placed on public figures involved in children's programming, especially during culturally significant holidays. Moses' comments highlight the tension between humor and seriousness in responding to such incidents. While his initial joke attempted to defuse the situation, his subsequent remarks underscored the growing problem of hostile online behavior and the real-world consequences it can carry. The minister's firm stance aligns with broader calls for respect and civility in public discourse. The fact that an actor playing a fictional character in a children's show has become the target of threats is widely viewed as a troubling sign of heightened societal sensitivity and polarization. As the controversy continues, the focus now shifts to how authorities will handle the threats and how the Sinterklaas journal will navigate the remainder of the festive season amid the heightened scrutiny. My next news is, source, Nieuwe Revue Le Verdonschot. Article by Leon Verdenschat. In his sharply written column, author and journalist Leon Verdenschat directly addresses Hoofdpayet Niels van der Laan, who again plays a prominent role in this year's annual Sinterklaas journal. Verdenschat opens by observing that enormous global issues such as the coronavirus pandemic and the war in Gaza seem to divide the Netherlands less than one fictional figure, Piet in puffy trousers and a ruffled collar. According to him, the symbolism surrounding the Sinterklaas tradition remains one of the most explosive cultural topics in the Dutch public debate. He expresses astonishment that people appear surprised by the slow and difficult process of forming a new Dutch government. Verdenschot argues that this should be expected in a country that for many years has been locked in fierce conflict over a completely imaginary character that is part of a children's celebration. He wryly labels this social tension polaricity teeth. The most recent wave of outrage erupted after an innocent storyline in the Sinterklaas Journal, in which potential logistical problems threatened the timely delivery of presents. In his role as hoofdbuyer, Niels van der Laan offered a few practical suggestions. Parents could perhaps purchase presents themselves, or a neighbor could temporarily take on the role of a helper Sinterklaas to ensure timely delivery. These playful ideas did not spark anger among children, but instead among adults on social media. The Telegraph quickly amplified the controversy, publishing an article based on a TikTok clip titled, "Sinterklaas Journal Snitches on All Parents." For readers unfamiliar with the term, the newspaper explained that snitchen means betraying. The underlying fury stemmed from the suspicion that the show's creators were pursuing a hidden agenda, gradually dismantling the Sinterklaas holiday itself. Online reactions claimed that they are slowly working toward a Sinterklaas-free Netherlands. Others suggested that Sinterklaas would eventually be banned altogether, just like fireworks. Verdenschot notes the irony, pointing out that fireworks cause numerous injuries every year, of which an estimated 37% involve children. The Telegraph subsequently created a digital wall of complaints, asking readers, "Join the discussion. Do you think the makers of the Sinterklaas Journal are going too far?" The responses were intense, and the consequences for Niels van der Laan escalated dramatically. In the past week he received death threats. The situation became so extreme that the police had to intervene. Verdenschot concludes that the Netherlands has become a country in which some people see conspiracies everywhere. The long arm of forces supposedly intent on erasing Dutch culture. Although he does not entirely dismiss cultural anxieties, he argues that such fears greatly underestimate the resilience of Dutch cultural traditions. What concerns him most, however, is that this fear has taken the form of aggression toward an actor playing a fictional character in a children's program. The fact that someone is threatened over a fictional problem in a fictional narrative, Verdenschot argues, shows that a portion of the country has taken a dangerous turn toward collective delusion. He ends by referencing an article in Philosophy magazine, which discusses the moral dilemma of whether parents should lie about Sinterklaas. While the article frames this as a concern for children, Verdenschot finds it ironically outdated. More and more, he argues, children struggle not with the story of Sinterklaas itself, but with the importance their parents attach to it. According to Verdenschot, that is the true societal threat. Not a fictional hoofdbuyer, but the very real adult behavior that surrounds him. My next news is, source, TC voters of Donald Trump do not want him to serve a third term as president. Article by Kate Plummer. A newly released poll shows that a significant portion of voters who supported former President Donald Trump in the year 2024 do not want him to serve a third presidential term. According to the survey conducted by The Economist and YouGov, 45% of Trump voters say they do not want him to run again, while 43% say they do. An additional 11% remain unsure. This means the group opposing another Trump candidacy within his own base is larger than the group that would support it. The debate intensified after Trump remarked during a Christmas reception at the White House that it was an honor to be president. He noted that he has a little more than 3 years to go in his current term, and added that 3 years for Trump is an eternity. Although the remarks seemed casual, they carried political weight because some of Trump's allies have repeatedly speculated about a possible run in the year 2028. This speculation goes directly against the 22nd Amendment of the United States Constitution. That amendment, ratified in the year 1951, explicitly states that a president may serve only 2 terms. Still, influential Republicans such as former Trump advisor Steve Bannon have suggested that Trump could nonetheless pursue a third term. In some of his boldest statements, Bannon declared that Trump would simply become president again in 2028, insisting that the American public should prepare for that reality. The new poll may be damaging for Trump's political standing, as it highlights division within his own base regarding an extended presidency. The data is based on responses from 568 Trump voters, surveyed between 28 November and 1 December. According to Thomas Whalen, an associate professor of American politics at Boston University, the results indicate that the MAGA movement is not immune to the law of political gravity. Whalen describes the movement as currently burned out, void of ideas, and lacking urgency. He adds that Trump may still have ambitions to run again, but he faces a major obstacle known as the United States Constitution. In Whalen's view, 8 years of Donald Trump is enough drama even for the most devoted MAGA supporter. A broader survey of 1,628 American adults shows that Trump's approval rating remains underwater. 39% approve of his performance, while 58% disapprove. Another recent poll by The Economist and YouGov reports a net approval rating of -19 percentage points, marking Trump's lowest level since returning to office in January of this year. However, the overall picture is not uniformly negative. A new INI/TIT survey shows Trump with a net approval rating of -3 percentage points, with 44% approving and 47% disapproving. This reflects an improvement from the previous month, when his net rating stood at -8 percentage points. Trump continues to insist that there is substantial support for a longer presidency. In March, he told NBC News that "a lot of people want me to do it," referring to calls for him to serve more than 2 terms. Steve Bannon repeated in October his belief that Trump will be president again in 2028. Yet the combined polling data suggests a more complicated reality. A growing segment of Trump's own voters simply does not support the idea of a 3rd term. My next news is source: Novelando, 32,900 followers. Title: Democratic lawmaker demands investigation into Donald Trump's 60 Minutes interview. Article by S. Costa. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin has issued strong criticism of how former President Donald Trump's interview on the program, 60 Minutes, was edited. According to Raskin, Trump may have exerted improper influence on the editorial decisions made by CBS News, the media company responsible for the broadcast. In an official letter sent to Ken Weinstein, the ombudsman of CBS, Raskin expressed concern about what he called the inappropriate influence that President Donald Trump exerted on the editorial decisions of CBS News. The letter, obtained by the American news outlet The Hill, emphasizes that these concerns extend beyond the controversial interview itself and point to broader potential interference in the company's journalistic processes. Raskin argues that Trump appears to be gaining increasingly direct control over editorial decision-making at CBS, placing the network's journalistic independence under pressure. He warns that such a situation not only undermines the credibility of the news outlet, but also endangers the fundamental right of media organizations to remain free from government pressure and political manipulation. One concrete point of criticism involves CBS's decision to omit certain remarks Trump made during the interview. These comments focused on Paramount, the parent company of CBS. In an unaired segment later revealed through a transcript, Trump stated, "Actually, 60 Minutes paid me a lot of money." He was referring to a settlement in which Paramount paid him $16 million to resolve a lawsuit. According to Raskin, the choice to omit these remarks raises serious questions about possible self-censorship or external influence within the newsroom. He suggests that CBS may be merely a victim in President Trump's systematic intimidation campaign against media companies, but adds that this does not reduce the concerns about objective reporting. In addition to his criticism, Raskin's letter strongly emphasizes transparency. He requests access to the editorial standards and internal procedures CBS uses when reviewing and responding to complaints. In his view, the public must understand how important journalistic decisions are made, particularly when interviews involve highly influential political figures. This controversy unfolds within a broader context in which the relationship between Trump and major media companies has been strained for many years. Trump has repeatedly criticized leading American news organizations and their coverage. Raskin's call for an investigation highlights the ongoing debate surrounding media independence, political influence, and the limits of editorial autonomy. Meanwhile, in the same news cycle, it was reported that the doctor who sold ketamine to actor Matthew Perry has been sentenced to 30 months in prison, drawing renewed attention to the issue of legal accountability in cases involving dangerous prescription drug misuse. Raskin's request for greater transparency and a formal investigation underscores that the debate over journalistic integrity and political influence is far from resolved, and is likely to continue shaping the American media discourse in the years ahead. My next news is, in the next video. I am Rayme Jurmain Djalis, and this was my Black African Diaspora news of the day.